The tension in the room was palpable before the interview even began. Clint Eastwood, a Hollywood legend, known for his no-nonsense attitude, sat across from a smirking reporter who clearly thought he had the upper hand. This wasn't just an interview, it was an ambush in disguise. The reporter, representing a well-known liberal news outlet, had one mission: to make Eastwood look outdated, out of touch, and irrelevant. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with condescension, ready to pounce. "Clint," he began with a smirk, "some say your views don't belong in modern Hollywood. Do you ever feel out of place?" A few chuckles rippled through the studio audience. The trap was set. They expected Eastwood to fumble, to backtrack, to prove them right. Instead, what happened next left the entire room in stunned silence. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's get started. The stage was set, and the agenda was clear. The network had carefully planned this moment, knowing that Clint Eastwood's presence alone was enough to draw millions of viewers. But this wasn't about celebrating his legendary career, it was about discrediting him. The producers, along with their team of researchers, had spent weeks compiling loaded questions, cherry-picking past statements, and crafting a strategy to make him appear out of touch. The host, a well-known liberal reporter with a reputation for twisting narratives, had been briefed to push Eastwood into a corner. The studio audience had been hand-picked. Younger, more progressive, more likely to laugh at the right moments, creating the illusion that Eastwood's views were outdated and laughable. The teleprompter was preloaded with leading remarks, ensuring the discussion remained one-sided. As Clint took his seat, the lighting was adjusted just so, a subtle trick, making him appear older, more frail. The host greeted him with an artificial warmth, but there was an unmistakable gleam of condescension in his eyes. The first few questions were soft, designed to lull Clint into a false sense of security. Then, with a calculated pause, the host smirked and delivered the first real strike. The trap was sprung. The host leaned forward, his voice dripping with faux curiosity, but his words laced with venom. "Clint, you've had a long career, legendary even. But let's be honest, times have changed. The old-school, tough guy persona, the rugged cowboy image, some might say it just doesn't fit in today's Hollywood anymore. Do you ever feel like maybe it's time to step aside?" A ripple of chuckles passed through the audience, polite at first, but growing. It was clear they had been primed to react. The camera angles were tight, ensuring that every smirk, every smug nod from the host was captured, while Clint sat still, his face unreadable. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say a word, "And I mean, let's not forget," the host cut him off immediately, eyes flashing with an almost rehearsed rhythm. "You've been pretty vocal about your, let's say, traditional values. Some would argue that your views on masculinity, politics, even Hollywood itself, well, they're just outdated. Do you ever worry that sticking to your guns, quite literally, is doing more harm than good?" This time, the laughs were louder, not just from the audience, but from the panelists seated nearby, co-hosts who had been brought in to amplify the attack. A younger, progressive film critic chimed in. "I mean, come on," she scoffed, shaking her head dramatically. "The whole man with no name thing? That's cool in the 60s, but today we're moving past the lone wolf, hyper-masculine era. Hollywood's about inclusivity now, stories that matter. You've had your time?" More laughter, more nods of agreement. The host smiled, leaning back, letting the moment sink in. Clint remained calm. He hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. His fingers drummed lightly on the armrest of his chair, but they weren't done with him yet. "And let's not forget your comments on the Oscars," the host continued, turning the knife deeper. "You said Hollywood's getting too soft, that too many people are playing victim. I gotta say, Clint, that kind of talk doesn't really fly anymore. Do you think maybe, just maybe, you're the one who's out of touch?" The audience erupted. Laughter, a few scattered "oohs," loud murmurs of approval. The panelists nodded, exchanging smug glances. The host grinned, knowing he had the upper hand. Clint finally raised an eyebrow, about to respond. "But, sorry, Clint, I just gotta say..." The host cut him off again. He wasn't actually sorry. He was enjoying this. "Isn't it kinda ironic that you're sitting here, defending yourself, when the very industry you helped build is moving forward without you?" More laughs. Another deliberate camera cut to Clint. It was clear. The goal wasn't to hear his answer. The goal was to humiliate him. But what happened next would silence the entire room. For a long moment, Clint Eastwood just sat there, still, unshaken. The room buzzed with laughter. Smug grins spread across the panelists' faces, and the host leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the spectacle. But those who truly knew Clint, who understood the legend sitting before them, recognized the shift. He tilted his head slightly, the faintest smirk forming. Then finally, in that signature gravelly voice, he spoke. "You done?" The words weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, but the way he said them cut through the noise like a gunshot. The audience's laughter died mid-chuckle. Even the host hesitated, caught off guard. Clint adjusted his jacket, took a slow breath, and then leaned forward. His eyes, sharp, calculating, locked onto the host, and the atmosphere in the room changed. "You keep talking about time passing me by," he said, his voice steady, deliberate. "But last I checked, I wasn't the one sitting here begging for applause by tearing down someone else." The host froze, his smile faltering just slightly. A ripple of murmurs swept through the audience. "See, kid," Clint continued, eyes narrowing, "I've been in this business longer than you've been alive. I built my career on one simple principle: earning respect, not demanding it, not playing victim when I didn't get it, not twisting words to make myself look smart while someone else takes the fall. But that's what you do, isn't it?" The audience was no longer laughing. They were watching, listening. The host shifted in his chair, trying to regain control. "Clint, No. Clint cut him off this time, raising a hand. The room erupted with gasps and scattered applause. The tables had turned. "You got your turn. Now it's mine." A slow, sinking tension settled in the host's face. He wasn't running this anymore. Clint was. "You sit here and act like Hollywood's changed, like it's all about inclusivity now." Clint leaned back, nodding. "Sure. But explain to me why the only progress you people celebrate is tearing down what came before you. Why do you act like the only way to build something new is by setting fire to the past? Let me ask you something." He turned his gaze directly at the panelists. "What have you built?" Silence. "I made movies that stood the test of time. I made stories that still get watched, still get talked about, decades later. And you?" He gestured toward the host. "You sit behind this desk, running your mouth, hoping someone will clip this moment for Twitter so you can feel important for 5 minutes. That's not legacy, kid. That's desperation. The audience shifted. The tension thickened. The host opened his mouth, but nothing came out. And then, from somewhere in the crowd, a slow clap. Then another. Then a wave of applause. The host's face turned pale. He wasn't in control anymore, and in that moment, he realized he had just humiliated himself. Within hours, the internet erupted. The clip of Clint Eastwood's takedown spread like wildfire across social media. Millions watched in stunned silence as the legendary actor dismantled the arrogant TV host with nothing but cold, hard truth. Hashtags exploded. Liner Eastwood unchained. Legend Clint. Talk show disaster. The response wasn't just massive, it was a cultural moment. Twitter, now X, became a battleground. One side praised Clint as the last of a dying breed, a man who stood tall in a world full of phonies. The other side scrambled to defend the host, but the damage was already done. The video clips circulating didn't lie. Eastwood wasn't aggressive, wasn't disrespectful. He simply exposed the arrogance of the media elite, and they had no answer. YouTube reaction videos piled in. Commentators, influencers, and even Hollywood veterans weighed in. Some called it the most satisfying moment in television history. Others declared the host's career finished. Podcasters dissected every line, highlighting how Eastwood had masterfully let the host dig his own grave before delivering the final blow. Then came the real fallout. Sponsors took notice. Within 24 hours, 3 major advertisers had quietly pulled their funding from the show. A statement from one company claimed they wanted to reevaluate our partnerships to ensure alignment with our audience's values. Translation: they didn't want to be associated with failure. Ratings for the next episode plummeted. Viewership collapsed by nearly 40% overnight. It was a bloodbath. People weren't just outraged, they were tuning out. And in an industry driven by numbers, that was a death sentence. Politicians even jumped into the mix. One congressman openly mocked the host on live TV, saying, "Maybe if he spent less time attacking legends and more time actually asking real questions, his show wouldn't be circling the drain." Others took a more serious stance, arguing that the moment exposed the bias of mainstream media, a system that once prided itself on objectivity, now ripping into anyone who didn't fit the narrative. Then came the final blow. Leaked footage surfaced. Unedited behind-the-scenes clips showing the producers coaching the host before the interview. In the video, they could be heard saying things like, "Don't let him talk too much, control the narrative, and push him on his age, make him look out of touch." It wasn't an interview, it was a setup, and the internet was done playing along. Petitions flooded in, demanding the show's cancellation. Viewers boycotted the network. A late-night host joked, "The biggest L of the year just happened in broad daylight." The host tried one last desperate attempt at damage control. He posted a statement, blaming bad faith actors for twisting the conversation. It backfired instantly. Every reply was the same. "We saw the tape. You did this to yourself." And just like that, his credibility was gone. Forever. As the backlash intensified, Clint Eastwood remained characteristically silent. He had already said what needed to be said, and now the world was watching as the consequences unfolded in real time. But while Eastwood himself wasn't speaking, his legal team was preparing for war. A lawsuit was inevitable. The interview had been more than just a hostile exchange. It had been a calculated ambush. And with the leaked behind-the-scenes footage exposing the network's intent, to manipulate and humiliate him, Eastwood's lawyers saw an opportunity to hit back hard. Within days, reports surfaced that his team was pursuing a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit against both the host and the network. The claim? Deliberate character assassination. The legal documents outlined how producers knowingly crafted a false narrative, coached the host to steer the conversation into a coordinated attack, and then heavily edited the broadcast to misrepresent Eastwood's words and reactions. But the real shockwave came when whistleblowers from within the network stepped forward. At first, it was anonymous leaks, messages from alleged insiders claiming that the entire interview had been scripted to make Eastwood look outdated, out of touch, even unstable. But then, an actual former producer went on record, revealing just how deep the manipulation went. "This wasn't journalism," she stated in an exclusive interview. "It was a hit job. They wanted a viral moment, something to make him look like he'd lost his edge, something that would get headlines. But they underestimated him." Her confession wasn't just damning, it was corroborated. More ex-employees came forward, sharing internal emails that proved executives had strategized this ambush from the start. One particularly damning email read, "Clint's a relic. We'll push him on his old-school views, make him lose his temper, then edit around it. The internet eats that up." But Eastwood never lost his temper. Instead, he exposed them. With irrefutable proof now in public hands, the network's legal team scrambled to contain the damage. They released a statement claiming the show's producers had acted independently, distancing themselves from the host and throwing lower-level employees under the bus. But the move backfired badly. The lawsuit wasn't just about Eastwood anymore. It was about the credibility of the entire media establishment. If one of the most respected actors of all time could be set up and publicly humiliated, who else had been a victim? How many other interviews had been rigged? Sponsors, already nervous, began pulling out en masse. Advertisers dropped contracts worth millions. Investors in the network's parent company started selling off shares. And then, the biggest bombshell yet. A former host, who had worked at the same network for years, released a 40-minute exposé detailing the network's long history of manufacturing outrage. "They don't care about facts," he stated. "They care about views, clicks, and control. And if they have to destroy someone's reputation to get it, they will." The clip was watched by over 20 million people in 48 hours. Now, the lawsuit wasn't just a case, it was a movement. The network was in free fall. And Clint Eastwood? He was untouchable. The fallout was swift and brutal. The network, once untouchable, was now in full-blown crisis mode. As the lawsuit gained traction and whistleblowers continued exposing decades of manipulation, advertisers pulled their funding, viewership plummeted, and the network's stock took a nosedive. Then came the final blow. Faced with mounting legal fees and overwhelming public backlash, the network made an emergency announcement. The controversial talk show was cancelled effective immediately. The host, once the network's golden child, was quietly fired. His social media accounts flooded with backlash. But the damage didn't stop there. Regulators launched an investigation into the network's unethical practices, and within weeks, hefty fines were slapped against executives for knowingly broadcasting manipulated content. Some of the top decision-makers were even forced to resign. And Clint Eastwood? He didn't just win, he dominated. His name, once dragged through the mud by biased media, was now stronger than ever. His legendary reputation not only survived the attack, but became bulletproof. News outlets that had once mocked him were now forced to report the truth, that he had been set up, that he had outsmarted the system, and that he had taken down an empire with nothing but the truth. And as for the internet, the video of his comeback moment continued to go viral, racking up tens of millions of views. Hashtags like Judge Eastwood was right and media exposed trended for weeks, and supporters flooded social media, calling for even more accountability. The message was clear. People were waking up. In the end, Clint Eastwood didn't just defend himself. He exposed an entire system, a system that had for years thrived on deception and manipulation. And as he walked away from the chaos, one thing was certain. He had the last word. If you care about the truth, share this video. Let the world see what really happened.